You meet someone for the first time. 3 seconds pass. You already know if you trust them. Not because they said anything true, not because you checked their story, just because of how their face looked, how their voice sounded, how quickly they smiled back. That decision feels like judgment. It isn't. It's a reflex. And it happens before your rational mind even gets a vote. What if the people you trust most aren't the ones who've earned it, but the ones who simply look like they have? Your brain didn't evolve to detect honesty. It evolved to detect safety. And for most of human history, those two things were close enough to treat us the same. A relaxed face meant no immediate threat. A warm tone meant no immediate danger. So your ancestors who trusted fast and trusted the right cues survived long enough to pass that shortcut down to you? The psychologist Alexander Todorov spent years studying exactly this. He showed people photographs of unfamiliar faces for 1/10 of a second, barely enough time to blink, and asked a simple question. Does this person seem trustworthy? The answers were remarkably consistent across participants. Different people, looking at the same stranger, arrived at almost identical snap judgments. Todorov's research revealed something unsettling. Trust isn't something you build through evidence. It's something your brain assigns instantly, based on features that have nothing to do with character. Wide eyes, a slightly upturned mouth, asymmetrical face. None of these correlate with honesty. All of them correlate with how quickly you decide to let someone in. So the first person who ever manipulated you probably didn't have to work very hard. They just had the right face for the job. And this isn't a rare glitch that only affects a few unlucky people. Todorov's later work scanned brain activity while participants viewed faces and found that a region called the amygdala, the part of your brain most associated with detecting threats, activated within milliseconds of seeing an unfamiliar face. Long before any conscious evaluation began, your brain was already voting on this person's safety before you had even finished, registering what they looked like. You didn't choose to trust them quickly. You were incapable of not doing it. Think about how strange that actually is. You'd never accept a verdict from a judge who decided a case in a 1/10 of a second before hearing any testimony. Yet you accept exactly that verdict from your own mind. Every single day. About every person you meet. And you almost never notice. Because the feeling doesn't arrive labeled as a guess. It arrives labeled as certainty. But it goes deeper than appearance. It's also chemical. The neuroscientist Paul Zak spent much of his career studying a hormone called oxytocin. You've probably heard it called the bonding chemical, the one released when you hug someone, when you make eye contact, when a stranger tells you something vulnerable about themselves. Zak's experiments found that even small doses of trust behavior, a warm gesture, a moment of shared vulnerability, could spike oxytocin levels and make people significantly more willing to hand over money, information, or loyalty to someone they just met. Here's the uncomfortable part. Oxytocin doesn't ask whether the trust is deserved. It just responds to the signal, which means the con artist who leans in a little too close, who shares a fake personal story a little too early, who mirrors your body language just enough to feel familiar, isn't reading you. They're triggering a chemical reaction you didn't consent to and can't consciously override in the moment. You think you're choosing to trust someone. Really, your body already decided, and your mind is just writing the justification afterward. And the justification always sounds reasonable. You'll say you trusted them because of something they said, some detail in their story that checked out, some fact you verified. But notice the order of events. The warmth came first. The verification came after. And it was shaped by a mind that already wanted to find a reason to say yes. This is why people rarely say, I trusted them, because I checked their references. They say I just had a good feeling about them. That feeling has a name. It's oxytocin, doing exactly what it evolved to do. And it has no idea whether the person triggering it deserves the response. This is where the story gets stranger. You'd expect that once you're burned, once someone you trusted turns out to be dishonest, you'd get better at spotting the next one. Logically, that should be true. Painful experience should sharpen judgment. But the psychologist, David DeSteno, ran a series of trust game experiments that found something closer to the opposite. People who had just been betrayed weren't more accurate at detecting untrustworthy partners in future rounds. They were simply more cautious across the board, trusting everyone less, including people who were perfectly honest. Betrayal didn't teach discrimination. It taught avoidance. And avoidance isn't the same as wisdom. It just means you built a wall instead of a filter. So the pattern isn't that you learn who to trust through experience. It's that you swing between two failure modes. Too open, because a face and a tone of voice hijacked your oxytocin system. Or too closed, because one bad experience convinced you that trust itself was the mistake, rather than the specific person. Neither of those is judgment. Both are just your nervous system trying to protect you as cheaply as possible. And cheap protection is exactly what it is. Building real judgment, the kind that actually separates trustworthy people from convincing ones, takes sustained attention over time. Avoidance takes none. So your brain, always looking for the lowest effort solution, chooses the wall over the filter almost every time and calls it wisdom because it feels like caution rather than fear. Think about the last time someone let you down. Was it a stranger with a suspicious face and a shifty voice? Probably not. It was someone who looked easy to trust. Someone who smiled at the right moments. Someone whose confidence made you feel like checking their story would be rude, almost insulting, an accusation you didn't want to make. That confidence wasn't evidence of honesty. It was, if anything, the opposite. Genuinely uncertain people tend to hedge, to qualify, to admit what they don't know. People trying to manipulate you have every incentive to sound certain, because certainty is what your face-reading, oxytocin-releasing brain interprets as safe. This is why the most damaging people in your life are rarely the ones who seem untrustworthy. They're the ones who seem trustworthy on purpose. And here's the twist that makes this even harder to defend against. The people best at exploiting this aren't necessarily cold or calculating. Many of them believe their own performance. They aren't always lying about being trustworthy. Sometimes they've simply learned, consciously or not, which signals get them what they want. And they've come to rely on those signals instead of on actual consistency. Which means you can't solve this by looking for villains, because the manipulation isn't always intentional. It's a feedback loop. Certain people get rewarded with trust for their tone, their eye contact, their symmetrical smile, and they never have to build the harder thing, a track record. Watch closely and you'll see this loop everywhere. Not just in con artists, but in ordinary life. The coworker who talks with total confidence in every meeting and gets promoted before the quiet colleague who is actually right more often. The friend who apologizes beautifully every single time and never has to change the behavior that required the apology. The stranger online who writes with total certainty about a topic they barely understand and gets believed, simply because hedging sounds weak and conviction sounds like expertise. None of these people necessarily set out to deceive you. They just discovered, through years of getting exactly this response, that confidence is a currency. And they kept spending it because you kept accepting it. So what actually predicts trustworthiness if not your instinct? Consistency over time. Not a first impression, but a pattern across. Dozens of small moments where someone had the chance to exaggerate, take credit, or cut a corner, and didn't. That's slow. It's unglamorous. It doesn't spike your oxytocin in the first 3 seconds, which is exactly why it gets ignored, in favor of the person who simply felt right immediately. Now think about your own life. Not as stranger as yours. Who did you trust fast, and why? Was it their argument or their delivery? Was it their record or their confidence? And who did you underestimate? Wrongly. Just because they were a little awkward, a little too honest about their doubts, a little less polished than the version of trustworthy your brain was scanning for? Somewhere in your past, there's probably a person like that. Someone who told you the honest, unflattering answer instead of the comfortable one. Someone whose face didn't do you any favors, whose voice wasn't especially warm, who never quite mastered the art of seeming certain. And there's a good chance you trusted them less than they deserved. For years, simply because they never triggered the shortcut. Meanwhile, someone else, someone smoother, someone who felt right within the first 3 seconds, got the benefit of the doubt again and again, right up until the moment it turned out to be undeserved. That isn't a coincidence. It's the same mechanism, working exactly as designed. just pointed in two different directions. The uncomfortable truth is that you are not a bad judge of character because you're careless. You're a predictable one because the shortcuts your brain uses were built for a world of immediate physical threats, not long-form deception. Todorov's split-second face reads, Zak's oxytocin spikes. DeSteno's overcorrected caution. All of it is still running in the background every time you meet someone new. You can't turn the system off, but you can stop mistaking its output for truth. Next time you feel that fast, warm certainty about someone, the feeling that says, this one is safe, don't treat it as information about them. Treat it as information about your own wiring. Notice it. Name it even quietly, in your own head. Then do the one thing the feeling is actively discouraging you from doing. Wait. Not forever. Just long enough to see whether the warmth holds up across a dozen small, unremarkable moments. The kind that never get performed because nobody thinks to perform them. Because the people worth trusting were never trying to pass your 3-second test in the first place. They were too busy being consistent to notice they were being tested at all. So don't wait for the first 3 seconds. Wait for the next 100.